Well, hi, everyone. I just wanted to say
Yes.
that Davidson Neon Design has been producing new neon, and the new Museum of Philadelphia is preserving the old for over 40 years. That's all I'm going to say about Len. He'll have to take it from there. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat.
And should I take over as Caitlin Jones?
Yes.
So I'm really Len Davidson, but because this is
Incognito.
technology, the name comes up as Caitlin Jones, and you don't want me to go into a whole explanation as to why that is.
Caitlin.
But you could call me Len, you could call me Caitlin, you could call me anything you want. And Michael, if you don't have much more to say, I'm just going to reiterate that
Yeah.
I've been doing neon work for the past 40 years, collecting old neon, making new neon, and tonight we're going to be showing a video that Alyssa Shea, who hopefully you can see on the screen, has put together about the Neon Museum that we're opening up in Philadelphia. And after the video presentation, which is going to run about 18 minutes or so, I'd be happy to entertain whatever questions you have and respond to them as best I can. So I'll turn it over to Alyssa and she'll start running the video.
Right.
A lot of people.
Hello, come on in. I'd like to welcome you to the review of the neon.
It's not on my screen yet, Alyssa.
No?
No.
Okay.
Michael, is it on yours?
No?
Pardon? Oh.
Okay.
There's
Sorry.
two Michaels here, so.
Must be.
I think he,
1 second. Okay, here we go. Sorry, it wasn't working for a sec.
Okay.
We're backing up.
And can we go full screen so our,
Yeah,
we won't interrupt the video?
yeah. Okay, here we go. Everybody ready?
Hello, come on in. I'd like to welcome you to your preview of the Neon Museum. My name is Len Davidson. I've been collecting and researching neon signs for the past 40 years, and this museum is the product of that work. Today, though the museum's not open to the public, you'll get a sense of what the museum's about. Particularly, there's different levels that we'll be getting into. One of them is kind of what I would think of as sort of the dazzling level. You could come into here almost like it's an outsider art site and just be blown away by the neon, by the accumulation of neon, by the colors of the neon, by the mass of neon signs in this space. You could come in this museum and sit here and sit in a chair and spin yourself around and just be awed, I hope, by the variety of signs. We'll start looking at the signs as art pieces, looking at specific signs, and then we'll go into sort of what I think of as the third level of this, which is really the culture and the history that the signs represent. I'll eventually talk about how this is a participatory museum, and it's not just about me and my staff and the signs, it's about people from across the United States, and particularly Philadelphia, who know about the signs and can contribute to our understanding of what the signs represent and of 20th century American culture. I mean, beyond just taking in the light of the signs, I think the next level of appreciating neon is really looking at it as a craft and as an art, and particularly as a folk art, because the people who made these signs were generally not trained in art. They certainly weren't trained in fine art. Most of the signs were made by mom and pop businesses where you might have a little bit of an artistic skill, but these things were made during the golden age of comic books. They were made when we had newspapers, multiple papers in different cities, and lots of cartooning. So there was that kind of cartoon folk art mentality that went into the development of these signs. This ray gun was in a store in Philadelphia called Rocket Ships and Accessories, and my friend Joel Spivak ran that store. His wife is a fine artist, a wonderful artist, Diane Keller, and she did the design for the ray gun, and it was made by a tube-bender in West Philly, Joe Dunn. And another sign that was done by a trained artist was the ice cream cone, which was made by an artist. We have several of his pieces. Very interesting Philadelphia artist named Anson Kenny. But beyond that, everything else was typically designed and executed by a sign shop. Particularly interesting to me is the photo supply sign, the animated camera, which is double-sided, was made in the mid-50s and didn't make it through a hurricane. There was a hurricane that blew through the suburbs of Philadelphia and disabled that sign, and since that time, the owner of Swartz's camera kept the sign up for many years and kept having to do repairs on the sign. It was a difficult thing to maintain. But when he closed his business, I was able to get the sign and restore it, because there's very little neon left on it. The animation didn't work. So that was one of the greatest, really, pieces of folk art, I think, that we have in our collection. One of the ones that catches a lot of attention is the hair replacement center sign, which was designed by, I think, Philadelphia's most brilliant sign maker, a fellow named Joe Feldman, who ran a company called Ajax Signs. And this is a good example of why I call this stuff folk art. I don't think a fine artist would think of designing a man and having him have a toupee that illuminates in a before and after kind of shot, but that's how Feldman worked. And we've got several of Joe Feldman's signs, including his masterpiece, the Pat Steak sign here. Another sign that I think is really interesting, just in terms of lettering, is the Saturn Club, where the lettering is done in a style called Beehive, which is a very unusual style, somewhat hard to read style of neon. Another sign that's interesting from a tube-bending perspective is this 57 Chevy. It was made by a really crackerjack bender named Carol Falone. When I would show her work to other tube benders, they would look at it and they marvel. Here there's all kinds of color splices, there's little circles that she did. The bending is just really well done. At the very top of the wall is the McGillen sign, which was fortunately for me, it was thrown out by McGillen's because they were having a lot of maintenance problems, which I can understand. It's a double-sided sign. It had been outdoors for years. Transformers were failing, and so I was able to get the sign and do the restoration, and we're very proud to have that. And McGillen's is a big supporter of the Neon Museum, so they got a new sign that's a replica of the old. They had that fabricated. Another piece on this wall that I think is really interesting is this particular clock, which is called a bowling clock. It doesn't have the original face on it. Originally it would have advertised a bowling alley, and it would have advertised both league and open bowling time. So these clocks were made with 4 neon tubes and a low voltage switch that ran back to the checkout counter. And when it was time for league bowling, you would switch the color, and the red would illuminate the portion of the face that portrayed league bowling, and then once league bowling was over, you'd switch back to open bowling. To me, one of the most beautiful signs is, and rare, is this Howard Johnson's lamplighter sign. I was able, when I got the sign, to fortunately have a lot of the original glass. So you'll notice the crimson red here. This is called clear ruby red glass. And the ruby that you get today, which is now made primarily in Italy or Germany, it's made overseas, doesn't have the same depth of color as the ruby when it was made domestically by companies like Sylvania in the United States. So if you're a neon aficionado, you always are looking for signs that have original stained glass, original ruby glass, original Novial gold glass, original midnight blue glass, because of just the beauty of those colors. The Pittsburgh paint sign was really a lucky break for me, in that was a sign made in the 1930s and it was never used. And I got a phone call from an antique dealer in North Carolina one day, and he said he's got a Pittsburgh paint sign, was I interested in it? I made him a small offer and he said fine. And I later learned that he had offered the sign to PPG Industries, which is Pittsburgh Paint in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And they, being, a large bureaucracy, said, well, we'll get back to you. And they eventually did get back to him. And I can only imagine how much more money they would have given for this sign than what I offered to get it. The sign below it is a part of two 65-foot long signs, which were in Glenside, Pennsylvania. These were also made by Joe Feldman at Ajax Sign. You can see the Ajax in the bottom left corner of the sign. And it was made for a company called Glenside Hardware, which was a corner hardware store. And Joe had these 65-foot long signs wrapping the corner. So there were two identical signs that had 5 hardware graphics on each face and triple stroke letters saying Glenside Hardware on each face. This was typical of Joe Feldman. People used to say that he threw in so much gingerbread on his signs, and I think these hardware graphics were the example of gingerbread that he put onto those signs. Most people notice first is our Dancing Elvis, which came from a bar called the Blue Suede Saloon in Philadelphia that was only open for a short time, but they invested in this kind of elaborate neon sign where you see Elvis dancing. Chez Vous, they would turn from a roller rink into a place for teenage dances that were run by a local DJ called Jerry Blavitt. Blavitt went on to be a Philadelphia celebrity and icon. We've got some old record albums that Blavitt put together. He's very into doo-wop and oldies and sort of educated my generation in doo-wop, and that's why there's a great passion in Philadelphia for a cappella doo-wop music. This D was used on the stage of a bar in Philadelphia on South Street called J.C. Dobbs. He used to walk up to the second floor of Dobbs and walk up through this dark staircase, and they'd have photos of people who had appeared there. And it was a bar where people started out, but a lot of the people who appeared there became famous. This is one of the most elaborate signs I've ever seen. If you count up the housing holes, there were 39 tubes just on this sign. At the time we got it, there were only 2 tubes left. So these are the 2 tubes that we were able to salvage. But what would be wonderful would be to restore the other 37 tubes. The only problem is there's no intact photos that we've been able to find of the sign with the neon on it at that period. The best photos I have where you can really see the neon were done in the 1980s, and there were, maybe 7 or 8 tubes that were noticeable. Now, I could figure out, like an archaeologist, what a lot of tubes were like. I know that there was a diamond that went over here, and there were rubies, the red porcelain over here, and so on. And there were outlines in red and green of the crown. But what are all these housings doing in the middle? People have told me, well, it spelled out Pats, and it was animated in the middle. I just don't know. I could probably restore 90% of it fairly accurately, but there's 10% of it that I would just have to make up or make some assumptions about. Horn and Hard Arts would rival Pat's for the most famous name in restaurants in Philadelphia. They probably served more meals to Philadelphians since they were started in the 1890s than any other company. At one point, there were about 70 Horn and Hardart automats. They invented the automat in 1902. The most important historical piece in the collection, which is the Bulova Watches clock. That clock came from the 1939 New York World's Fair. I've never figured out why this happened, but we know that 3 and possibly 4 of these clocks came to Philadelphia and were hung above jewelry stores in Philadelphia after the fair. Levis's has a lot of personal history to me because my dad would take me there after basketball games, but his father used to take him to Levis's, and then I used to take my son to Levis's. So when this sign closed, it was really heartbreaking for me, when the shop closed. And the sign ended up in an architectural salvage place, and I, of course, bought it and restored it, and so now I'm the curator of the Levis's sign. Again, it's a sign, but it's more than a sign for me and for a lot of people, and that's exemplified by the 50-year club sign that we have on the wall. People who used to go to Levis's for 50 years would give them their name. When I started learning about neon, I became fascinated by figural signs, and initially, those were the kinds of signs I most wanted to collect. You know, if it was pictorial, if it was animated, they were the best signs from my perspective. Today, I still love those kinds of signs, but the history is very interesting too. So if it's just lettering, but it's got an interesting history behind it, that becomes a valuable sign to me also. We've made up sign cards. So these are guides in the museum that tell you a story and a history about each of the signs. I talked to the old guys about how they started the business and how they were second generation in the business and who started and all that. You know, taking down a sign with my hands, but I'm listening with my ears and trying to memorize what they're saying or thinking of key points. And then when I get outside of there, I start writing up notes and make notes of these things. So when it came to actually writing up the sign cards, part of it is oral history that I've already collected. Part of it is just looking these things up. So far, this is all things that we're providing to you. But we're going to have memberships at the museum, and we want your participation in a lot of ways in the museum. One of the ways, the most obvious way, is if you know something about a sign, if your aunt worked at Horn and Hardart's, if you went to Levis's Hot Dog, if you know something about Sunray Drugs, we want you to tell you that story. So when you come into the Neon Museum, you knew something about that business, write it up on a 3x5 card and post it on our wall. And we'll be collecting that kind of oral history. If you've got a big story, more than something for a 3x5 card, we'll tape record you. We're collecting old Philadelphia tins and crates to keep these museum guides in. And we've got about 5 or 6 of them so far, but we need a few more. So if you have crates or tins, that's another way you can participate in the museum. It's a very flexible space, and a lot of the junk over here is really just storage that will be out of the way, so it will open up this area. So what you have to picture is basically a wall for sales where we've got t-shirts, books. We're adding to our inventory small neon signs that are for sale, then a library and a lounge, then an art gallery, and the other thing that's not here yet is our video program. We're going to have a large screen television. We've been gathering videos and PowerPoints, which is another way that you can participate in this museum. These are not my videos and PowerPoints. These are things that have been sent to us. Another way that you'll get information about our 3 main topics, neon, Philly history, and 20th century American culture, is by looking at the video presentations. So these are all ways that you can get involved. You can come in and give us an idea. You want to do a talk here, you'd like to do a presentation, you'd like to run a class, you'd like to show us your glass art. We're very open to it. It's made to be a flexible space. We can have parties here. One thing that I didn't mention, which I guess should be obvious because we've got a neon to order sign here, but we do make custom neon signs. We don't just make these small standard pieces, but we can do anything from movie marquees down to signs for your individual home or business.
Cool.
Well, there's a few questions. The biggest one is, when is the museum going to open?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I wish I knew when COVID would go away, and we probably could open within a week if we wanted to, but we'd have to open under circumstances that I'm not really that interested in opening under. We'd have to have social distancing, everybody would have to wear a mask, you'd probably have to walk in a particular way around the museum, and the museum is made to be a hangout space. It's made to be a place where people can talk about 20th century culture, they can talk about technology, they can browse in the library, they can look at videos, and currently you couldn't have that sort of social interaction, which is really the key aspect of the museum. You wouldn't feel comfortable handling sign cards and passing the cards on from one person to the next. So those are the things that my staff and I have been talking about, and we're just really not sure. We may open up at some point within the next couple of months, but we don't have a specific time. And we're using this time for a variety of purposes. One of the things that we're doing right now is we're going to be putting up another 26 signs in the common areas of the building that we're in. We're one space within a block-long building that's got 25-foot high ceilings. And part of the deal when I rented my space was that I was given outlets in the common area, and there'll be, you know, in addition to whatever we've got now, we've got 85 or 90 signs in our space now, and there'll be another 26 actually that will be in the common area. So I don't really want to rush the thing and have people have a kind of shortened experience or a partial experience of what the museum is. Although we've had so many people who want to come to the museum that perhaps we will bring people in by 2s and 3s. We just don't know yet. So I have to kind of hedge on the answer to that question.
But you said something about you'll be able to send this link. They'll be able to see it, see the video.
Alyssa is our video wizard. I guess she could speak to that.
Yeah, we can make that video available so that people could rewatch it. And
Somebody asked about the word neon. Len, do you know the definition of the word neon?
Well, neon is a rare gas. You know, back in chemistry class in high school, they taught you about the 5 noble gases: neon, argon, krypton, xenon, whatever the 5th one is. I don't know if it's helium. I forget my chemistry, but there might be someone may know where the word neon came from. It might relate to Greek mythology or something like that, but but neon is a gas which, when you run high voltage through it, it glows a bright red orange. And actually, what we think of as neon signs are very often really argon signs. Most of the colors that you're getting from argon and mercury vapor inside of a tube. And I don't know if they really wanted, if your questioner wanted to know about this, but you know, argon by itself in a clear tube glows sort of bluish purple, and neon by itself is red, like red orange. And then you're getting other colors from phosphorescent powders or colored glass. So if you had a more specific question about what is neon or how is neon used, I could respond to that.
What about how are you getting the word out, and what is the PR campaign?
Well, it's, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I got very good at doing press releases when we used to have newspapers and magazines and things like that. And my staff, which is typically about 30 years younger than me, has told me that, well, that's passe. We don't really do press releases now. So we're doing Instagram and we're doing Facebook. And what I learned, though, from having been in the neon business and having had this museum concept for many years, is that the media goes crazy over neon. Even without press releases, what I found in Philadelphia was that if they did a 5-minute feature about neon work, then 4 other media places would see that, and they'd pick it up. So I'm not really that concerned about public relations, frankly. I think that just through word of mouth and through social media, people have already heard a lot about this museum. So I don't think we have a real big plan for a lot of particular press orientation. But already we've been asked to be on this program with SCA. We're going to be on the program in San Francisco for Neon Speaks. I've had a bunch of interviews already at LaSalle University, at Preservation Alliance. So the word spreads. It's not a concern.
Well, here's a good one. Is the art gallery rotating? Will the museum look different from season to season or year to year?
Yeah, probably from month to month. What we didn't show you is that we've got 2 walls. After the 2 walls that you saw that had books on them, there are 2 blank walls. And then we haven't built them yet, but we're going to have 3 4x8 double-sided drywall walls that will be hinged together. And those 3 drywall walls and the 2 other walls constitute the art gallery. And it's both art and history. So we'll have programs that we can change weekly or monthly, or we can run them for a couple of months. It really varies. And those programs could be on diners, they could be on drive-in theaters, they could be on motels, they could be on neon sign shops, they could be on neon history. There's a whole variety of topics that were mentioned in the video, primarily Roadside America, all facets of neon, and Philadelphia history. So that's what the changing shows will be. And we're, like I said, we're very open to different ideas for things within those 3 topic areas.
Great. Someone asked, are the neon colors from the gas or the glass tubes?
They're from 3 things. From the gas, typically we only use 2 out of the 5 noble gases. So one factor is the gas, which is either neon gas or argon and mercury. Then secondly, you have phosphorescent coatings inside of the glass tubes. So there's a wide variety of powders that give you different colors. And then the third thing is what I call stained glass or colored glass, where the actual glass is not clear with a powder in it, but it's red glass or blue glass, what I was talking about in the video, what we call midnight blue, ruby red, noveal gold, those kind of stained glass colors. So you put those 3 things together and you could get a wide variety of colors.
Someone asked, did you do any work with Lily Lacklich from the Museum of Neon Art in Los Angeles?
I've spoken with her. I've never done any work with her. I have her book. I'm a big fan of her work. I've seen her work, and last December I was out at LA at the Museum of Neon Art, which my wife and I visited, and we had visited there years ago when it used to be on Traction Avenue. So we've been followers of her for a long time, and she's one of the popularizers. I don't know if you call her a founder, but she was an early advocate for the rebirth of neon. Neon was dying back in the 60s and 70s to some extent, and then Lily and Rudy Stern and a variety of people came along and said, you know, this is great both as history and it's also great as art. And Lily was instrumental in bringing an artistic perspective to looking at neon.
When you do open, will you be offering any neon bending classes?
I don't think so. There was going to be another of the tenants who was supposed to be next door to us, who was going to have a glass shop, but that involved some difficulties as far as bringing gas lines into the building and so on. We will have classes and we will do demonstrations, but it will be more of assembling signs, demonstrating uses of different colors, putting signs together, taking them apart, you know, answering people's questions. I've done lots of classes in the past on things like neon design. So, you know, we might have 10 people come in and have them come up with the sign design and help them learn how to design a neon sign. And then if they want to, we can get the signs fabricated and then brought back and have them paint the signs and wire the signs and so on. But the actual bending is something that we're not equipped to do.
Will you be
I should note though that we do have some vendors who are part of the Neon Museum. Two vendors that I've been working with for a long time, Bob Bodek and Eve Hoyt, who are both very interested in the museum, and I'm sure they'll come and give talks, and it's possible that there'll be people who will fabricate some designs for folks who take classes in our museum.
Somebody asked if you'll be interviewing the makers and hosting.
Interviewing makers of neon signs?
I guess.
Yeah, the people I've just mentioned, Bob and Eve, are two people who are fabricators, neon fabricators. You know, when I moved back to Philly in 1979, I'm really a sociologist by background, and I used to run around the city. I had gotten interested in neon down in Gainesville. So I'd go around the city and I'd go to the old sign shops and interview the old timers. So I guess now I'm an old timer, but you know, back in 1979, there was this whole generation of tube benders and sign men and women who had learned after World War II. And unfortunately, that generation is pretty much gone. Most of those folks have died off. There's still a couple of them around who I became very friendly with. I used to just hang out with them all the time. And what I found was that if you show some interest and you ask a lot of questions and you want to know about somebody's field, you know, you're like a dog at their feet. I was very willing to be that kind of person who, you know, would hang out at your pants leg or at your shoes or whatever. And, you know, I lapped up a lot of information from these people and have maintained those friendships. And I would love to bring some of those guys in. There's one guy named Nick Mancuso who's still around in Philly, and he must be in his 90s at this point. And I'd love to bring somebody like that in. And if Nick could make it in, I'd certainly invite him to give a talk. And, you know, I'm not so much even concerned about having formal talks. I'm more interested in having people sit around with each other. You know, not that one person is an expert and you do a lecture like in academia, but if you had 10, 15 people sitting around in a circle and talking about technology or about neon or whatever the topic area might be, that's more what I see this museum being about. So yeah, bringing makers in would be wonderful. Someone
asked, is it loud in the gallery and from all the buzzing transformers?
You know, actually it's not. It's surprisingly quiet, and we've used mostly electronic transformers, which really don't make much noise. There was a buzz or two that I heard in the video, but it's unusually quiet. But there's construction going on in the hallways, And you might have heard some people laughing, and you might have heard some equipment going on. And there's contractors they're building out a restaurant in the Next Fab building. We're part of a space that's run by an organization called Next Fab, and they're a maker space. They try and catalyze individuals who want to learn about woodworking or metalwork or 3D printing or computers or whatever. So they're kind of an incubator, and they have about half of the building, and the other half of the building is tenants like me, and my next door neighbor is an architectural salvage guy. There's also a bicycle shop there. There's a bunch of different tenants. So some of the noise that you hear is just noise from the hallways and from the contractors and from other tenants in the building.
Have you heard of rainbow neon signs run by the Grinsberg family?
No, I haven't. Where is Rainbow Neon Signs? I may have heard of them, but that name doesn't strike any bells. But sometimes, you know, if you tell me the name of a person or you tell me where they are, and you know, I've roamed around the country and been in a lot of sign shops, so it's possible. But if they want to follow up on,
Maybe he'll respond.
okay.
Do you have to compete with others to acquire these signs?
That's a very good question. I've acquired the signs in many ways over the years, and I never really felt typically that I was competing with other people. I would travel around the United States and come across signs and ask about buying them. I'd find lots of signs in Philadelphia in vacant buildings. People would call me up who had signs. The problem, though, what competition speaks to at this point is that these signs have become commodities, which, though they're historic and they have a lot of value, that is both a blessing and a curse, because if you've got a nice neon sign and you want to sell it, you can put it on eBay or a variety of other channels to sell the sign. And you know, something that was iconic for Austin, Texas, or for Philadelphia, or for New York City could very easily end up in San Francisco or Tokyo or, you know, anywhere in the world. So when someone offered me and continues to offer me signs, a variety of signs, my first reaction generally will be, can you keep it in your hometown? You know, does it have meaning for people where the sign was originally from? And if it's going to be destroyed, and if nobody really wants to keep the sign there and work with it, then I'd be interested in the sign. So unfortunately, I think there are people who are very unscrupulous about this and will take signs from anywhere and you know, just want to pile up signs in their collections, or they just want to get signs so that they can resell them and, you know, act as pickers. And you know, it's not that there's anything really wrong with being a picker, except that you're walking a fine line between destroying somebody else's cultural history. You know, if you want to pick signs, make sure that they don't really belong in a locale first, and need to stay in that locale and have the possibility of staying in that locale.
Well, then there's another question. How do you typically find your signs?
Well, as I was saying, many ways. People call me up. You know, when I moved back to Philly in '79, I was doing management consulting, and I was doing neon part-time, and I was teaching part-time, but I was really fascinated by neon. I learned about it in Florida, and I spent one day a week out of every week just roaming the streets. I would get in my car, I'd get my camera, and you know, this is such an incredible old industrial city that I found lots to do just by finding a different neighborhood, going up and down different streets, and looking at signs. And I'd come across signs that were in defunct storefronts. I try and find who was the owner of that storefront. So I got a lot of signs that way. that's one way that I got signs. Another major way was going to old sign shops. And I started doing that when I lived down in Florida and traveled all over the state of Florida. And my sister lived in New Orleans, and New Orleans has a fabulous sign history. So I would go to sign shops in New Orleans and I'd say, I'm collecting neon signs. Do you have any signs that you want to sell or give away or whatever? And what you would find down south, more so than up north, is that sign shops would have, in Florida, they would call it acreage, or people would call them boneyards. Companies would take down a sign, and instead of taking it to a junkyard, if they had the acreage, they would throw it out back. And so I'm in Gainesville, Florida, and I drive to Jacksonville or I drive to Tampa, and I look up sign shops in the phone book, and people were more than happy to let me roam through their boneyards and pick whatever I want. And they might say, give me $10 and you can take whatever you want, or take it off of my hands. One time I went to New Orleans and I went to a sign shop that was in 3 shotgun houses. And I said, you have any old signs that you don't need? And the old man in New Orleans said, yeah, go into building number 3, but be careful. And so I went into this building. It was a shotgun house, and there was nothing in it but old signs. And it was so full of neon tubing that you could even go into the bathroom where there were signs stacked perhaps 10, 20 tubes high inside of the bathtub in this place. And so when I saw this, it was like I hit the mother lode. And I rented a U-Haul truck, and the guy said, take whatever you want. And I just loaded up this U-Haul and drove it all back to Gainesville. So when I left Florida, we had a moving van. We had my 1959 Chevy, and the Chevy was just totally piled up with neon tubes. So that's really been a major way that I've gotten signs, by going to sign shops. But it's harder and harder to do that as these things have become more commodified, and as the sign shops realize that they have some value. And a lot of times you might go to a sign shop and ask them, do they have any old signs? And they'll say, oh, we just tossed 100 of them out yesterday. So it's luck of the draw. It's just being at the right place at the right time. You could also get them on eBay too, for that matter. You could buy signs. There's a dozen different ways that I've acquired signs over the years.
Are you ready? Do you have any videos of you working in the glass studio?
Yeah, over the years, there's probably been, Alyssa could speak to this better than me, I think, because she took these things from my collection. I had some videotapes of, TV interviews that were done with me years ago on different television stations about my neon collection. And some of those show me working with neon, but I don't think they're, they're made for TV. It's like a TV cameraman comes in and says, work on this sign. So it's not like it's, it's candid or accurate particularly. It's just something made for TV. But yeah, I do have those kinds of examples of, 5-minute shots of made for TV of my, driving around or looking for signs or working on signs.
Okay, this is a long one. Can you summarize briefly the principal technical and stylistic advances in the development of neon signs and what periods they are associated with?
No.
I guess anybody
I
can
can give
answer
you books to do that. I could talk about it roughly, but let's do a 1-minute history. So there was this guy, George Claude, who came up with a useful electrode. This could be very rough because for 100 or 200 years before him, a variety of scientists knew that if you run a high voltage charge through a rare gas, you're going to get a glow. And we couldn't really harness this commercially until this Frenchman, George Claude, came along, and he made a long-lasting electrode. We were able to make neon tubes before the 19 teens, but they wouldn't last. They would burn out. And because of his electrode, we were able to have a technology that was actually practical for commercial use. And then through the, wow, this is too hard. You know, I could talk about the 1930s and the 40s and so on. But let's just jump to the 50s. The 50s was the heyday of, you know, the American roadside post-World War II. The GIs came home and America had a booming economy, and we had all kinds of development along the roadside. And, you know, we've got lots of books about that kind of development, and neon was a big part of that with, you know, giant drive-in movie theaters and giant animated signs and, yeah, motels. And my wife is coaching me over here. Motels. Thank you. Yeah, no, but she's absolutely right. Wonderful motel signs. So lots of the real classic kinds of things were built in the 50s. And then I guess with Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson and, you know, highway beautification, neon got a bad rap. And, you know, by the 70s, neon was seen as something that was just honky tonk and, you know, for sex strips in cities. And so there was some kind of decline in neon. But when I came back to Philly in 79, it was a booming time, again, thanks to Rudy Stern and Lily Lakich and people like that. And there was a, you know, great advancement of looking at neon as an art and making neon art and seeing some of these old signs as folk art. And depending on your perspective, fortunately or unfortunately, LEDs have come in over the last 20 years, and there's been a giant decline across the country in the volume of neon signs that are made. Interestingly, there's a lot of young people, it turns out, who are really interested in neon and learning about neon and using it artistically. But to support yourself as a sign shop that primarily does neon work is becoming a thing of the past. You know, when I moved back to Philly, I was told that, you know, in the 50s, there were probably 50 sign shops in Philadelphia. And by the late 70s, there might have been a dozen or so. And today, I don't know that there's any. You know, there's a couple that primarily do neon, but most sign shops do a variety of other things. They, you know, we used to have sign shops that just made Coca-Cola signs, that focused on beer signs, that made neon clocks. There were specialists. There was so much neon work. There were hundreds of feet of tubing made for theaters, you know, back in the 50s and so on. So there really is a fairly radical decline if you looked at the number of active sign shops in the United States. And yet at the same time, there's this kind of rebirth that a lot of us are trying to nurture among people who are interested in neon as an art form. So that's my quick summary about the history of neon. I'm skipping quite a bit in that summary.
The Sign Hops kids are now operating them and don't keep as messy a shop.
That's a comment or a question? Or
I guess that's a comment.
Sign shops are not as messy today. Was that the comment?
Sign shops kids.
Sign shops kids are not as messy. Well, two things. Let's talk about kids and let's talk about messiness. The way that sign shops were perpetuated from the 50s on, and probably before that, was through family apprenticeships. So when I started looking at the neon industry, both in Florida and in Philadelphia, there were lots of brothers and sisters, there were family members, there were, you know, brothers doing neon, extended families. And, you know, the tube bender would be somewhat secretive and teach his kid, who would go into the neon business. And then, you know, the refrain in the industry became, well, the kids want to go to college now. They don't want to work with their hands. They don't want to take a trade anymore. So, so the kids who were the sons and daughters of people in the sign business have not gone into the sign business in the numbers and the percentages as was common back in the 50s. As far as sign shops being messy, they run the range. I've been in sign shops that are extremely messy. I'm just thinking of my friend in Austin who moved out of his sign shop. And that was one of the messiest ones I've ever seen, but it was also one of the greatest sign shops I've ever seen too. And my friend Bob Bodek, who does signs, he keeps a very clean, nice shop. So I'm not sure what they're getting at, but I'll give a plug to Evan Voiles, who moved out of his very messy sign shop into a new shop recently. And he does fabulous neon work in Austin. So if you have more to say about messy or kids or whatever, please follow up, because I'm not sure what that question's about.
Well, here's an interesting one. Do you have a favorite foreign country for neon? The neon in downtown Turin, Italy is fantastic.
I've been through Italy. I haven't been to Turin, Italy. And frankly, in Western Europe, I've been very unimpressed by the neon that I've seen. In Eastern Europe, when we were in Budapest, I could see the remnants of what had been fabulous neon. They had made these huge architectural signs that were constructed with angle iron backings, and they weren't lit anymore, but you'd see those all over Budapest. So I really don't know in terms of what I've seen as far as, you know, great foreign neon. What I've seen on film though, you know, in video and photos and so on, is that there's fabulous neon in China, in Hong Kong particularly, in Japan. You know, I know that there's great neon there, but in Europe, you know, they don't have that same kind of roadside tradition where, you know, they have nice zoning in Europe. So you get outside of a city and you can't like clutter it up with neon signs like we can do in the United States. You know, you get out into the countryside and you're in the countryside in Europe, and that's really nice if you want you know, a pleasant countryside. But for people like me, I, you know, drive through these Western European cities and, you know, where's all the clutter? Where's all the chaos? Where's all the neon signs? And you don't find them there. But, you know, I'm in the minority. I'm looking for things that are probably different than most people are who are going to Europe.
Well, I think that's the last of the comments.
On mine, it says you have 26 notes on chat. Do you have the same 26 number?
I can save it and send it to you.
Okay.
And you want to tell people then they can find out on Facebook?
Yeah, I
easy to
wanted to
find?
mention that we have a wonderful staff. You know, Alyssa is our video wizard, as I said, and she's putting together the video program at the Neon Museum. And another fellow who works with us is Sam Contorado, who's a neon installer extraordinaire. And we have a brand new website that Jeremy Tenenbaum put together, and he's really fabulous as a designer and as a web designer. So if you want to find us, you can go to www.neonmuseumoffphiladelphia, that's all one word, .com. And our Instagram handle is also Neon Museum of Philadelphia. Am I right, Alyssa? Or is it called a handle? Or a tag or?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Handle.
Yeah, and so I post things on Instagram, and then they go over to Facebook, and Alyssa plays with the Facebook postings. And you know, our address is 1800 North American Street, which is in Lower Kensington. It's a rapidly developing part of Philadelphia above Girard Avenue, which is becoming kind of an arts district, although the virus has held that back a little bit. So I'm hoping that folks who visit Philly will will come up and see us and, you know, give us a call, send us an email, let us know you're here. If there's just 2 or 3 people, I'd happily bring people in on, you know, kind of an individual or 2 or 3 basis, but I'm not really, as I said before, I'm not really ready to open up to the public in general at this point. Any other questions that you have for me?
Looks like that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. I want to give you my appreciation too. And
Sure.
I should mention that, beyond the 3 other main staff people, this museum has been the outgrowth of and the product of a lot of collaboration. I've been involved in an organization for 25 years called the Dumpster Divers, which is people who work with found objects and are saving Philadelphia in a literal and a figurative way. And my Dumpster Diver group has a lot of members. I don't want to start mentioning them because I'll mention 10 and I will not mention another 20, but those folks have been instrumental in helping create this museum too. So I'm giving thanks.
I'm just putting the plug for next month
Okay. Oh yeah, why don't you do
in
that?
the chat. That's it.
You have as much trouble with this technology as I do, Michael, it looks like.
Just can't see it. It's so tiny. Well, or it's white and then the lights are so bright. There, I think that's it. Well, thanks. I guess you can end it anytime. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Hope to see you in the museum soon.
That'd be great.